All right, I'm here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. My name's Bob. I've been brought here to replace these broken sash cords. Now, I've seen a lot of their YouTube videos. I'm here to show you how I do things, some of my techniques, some of the tools that I use, and what kind of procedures that I go through. Now, when I first look at this window, the very first thing I look at is the upper sash is painted shut. I'm not going to touch it. That's a whole operation unto itself. So right now I'm just going to focus on getting the lower sash working, because really that's all you need to do. Some people strip them down, bare wood, new glazing, weather stripping. That's great, but that's a $1,500, $2,000 process. I'm going to get these ropes replaced, get the window working, probably for $100 a window. So that's a big difference. Let me show you some of the tools that I'm going to use. You probably know that I got to take this window stop off each side in order to get the sash out. Multi-tool, one of my best friends. After 120 years, there's a big paint buildup. So that, here, I'm going to break the seal that's been caulked and it's been painted. It just makes taking that window stop out a little easier. Step 2 is breaking the paint seal. This is pretty straightforward. Get it loosened up. All right. That's one side. Make sure you get all the nails out. Again, the paint buildup, you want to get a good amount of this paint chipped away. This window, very common in this city. Weather stripping on 4 sides of the lower sash. On the bottom, on the 2 sides, and you got weather stripping along here. This is the most important weather strip to keep. Now this weather stripping here on the sides, I try to keep it if I can. This window seems to be working pretty well with the weather stripping. A lot of times the weather stripping is bent, crooked, that prevents the window from going up and down. So in this case, I am going to try to keep it. And I'm just going to run a felt marker along the edge, and I'll explain why that's important later on. All right, now we're going to take the window out, but in order to get the window out, we've got to get the weather stripping out. Now this weather stripping is held in with a couple different small little nails. Sometimes they come out easy, sometimes not. Use this to find out where the other nails are. Looks like we're good. Timber. The window's out. Now it's time to really take a look at what we have here. This weather stripping, if you can see along the edge of the window, this ridge fits in the slot and allows the window to slide up and down. Side stop, or weather stripping, is actually held in place in a slot with this piece of wood. Again, sometimes these are so crooked the window doesn't go up and down very often. And the reason I made a mark with a marker to show where the edge of this is, because this fits into the slot here, I want to make sure when I put it back in that this gets back into that slot, and this will tell me that it is if I can see that mark. So having that in line, make sure that the sash going down will clear that stool. So I'll take these out for a while. Now, here's the remainder of the ropes. Let me get these out. All right, notice there's a hole here. Oftentimes, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. You tie a knot at the end of the rope, bang it into that hole, and it'll hold it. I tend to not do it that way. The question is, how long should the sash cord be? Here's actually the start of how I determine how long the sash cord will be. I'm going to measure side of the sash. I want the end of the sash cord that I attach to the side of the sash to be 23 inches off from the bottom. And I'm going to make a mark, 23 inches. I'm going to do the same for the other side. Now, it's at this point in time, I want to check the weather stripping here. This weather stripping acts like a hook. This weather stripping acts like a hook in the opposite direction. You'll see it when I flip this, how they nest into each other. And I have to also look at the condition of this side of the weather stripping. I need about 1/8 of an inch clearance here and 1/8 of an inch clearance here for it to nest properly. The gap here needs to be consistent. A lot of times these are banged in, but actually these aren't too bad. Having these locked in place is really important, keeping the air from leaking through. This bottom piece of weather stripping doesn't look that bad. A lot of times I take it out because that seems to be the one that gets beat up the most. Now, I got to get to the weights. This is the door which covers the weights up. This door is being held in place by this parting bead. So the parting bead does two things. It holds the edge of the weather stripping in place and it holds this in place. Now, most people would take out this entire parting bead. What I do, which makes this a much quicker process, I'm going to only take half of it out. If you don't have a multi-tool, you need one. Now, this is a multi-tool blade that will cut the rest of this parting bead. Now, normally there's not much paint on the inside of this, but there's usually a lot of paint on the outside. Take your box cutter, break that paint seal. Assuming there's no nails, this comes out. See how easy that came out rather than taking the whole parting bead out. Over the years, these parting beads, sometimes they work themselves out from the slot that they're in, and then they get painted, and then the paint prevents it from going all the way in. So just scrape some of this excess paint off. Here you can actually have a better look at the slot that the weather stripping fits into. This door should just open up. Done. This shoulder on the door, how the parting bead holds the door in place because it sits onto that shoulder and fits into that slot. The way they made these windows in the old days, they didn't use nails. They just used friction to hold things in place. This is a tool that I find very useful. It's a tack pull. It helps pulling nails out, as you saw when I was pulling the weather stripping out. So that's the weight for the lower sash. Behind this piece of wood is the still attached weight for the upper sash on this side. If you put both of these weight on a bathroom scale, it would weigh the same as the sash. Because if the weights are too heavy, then the window doesn't stay down. If the weights are too light, then the window will stay down but won't stay up. So many of these repairs that I make are because they used the wrong type of sash cord. This is the sash cord that I use that's been used for 100 years. I even so often see the pink spots. I'm pulling out ropes that were there 50 years ago and they have the same pink spots on them. This is a 1/4 inch, because if you use thinner, what they call sash cord that you get at Lowe's, the thinner rope gets tied up in the pulley, between the pulley and the opening, and just jams in there. Whereas this is thick enough that it stays within the track. Another thing that I do that I've learned over the years, some of you probably know what I'm doing with that. How am I going to get the rope through the pulley down here so I can attach it to the weight? An old carpenter friend of mine showed me this trick. I can't take credit for it. It's a chain, and on the end of the chain is a hook. You can start to see why I use duct tape. So I'm just going to hook the end of that rope through the duct tape like it was a worm on a fishing line. Now, lay it in the groove here. Because of the weight of it, it naturally falls on its own. I haven't seen anybody on YouTube do that. Now, attaching the rope to the weight. This is a slip knot. I don't know what the name of it is. When I was doing windows in the beginning, I saw this knot that seemed to be pretty common. And I figured, well, the old guys must know what they're doing because I see it so often. It's really just a slip knot. And what it does, it holds the weight vertical to the rope, as opposed to doing anything in which the knot is over here and it's got to bend around the top of it. This may not be necessary. But when these weights are going up and down, I just want to make sure there's no obstruction. So I try to keep the end of the knot. Remember that mark? If you can imagine the lower sash sitting here, and I had marked where, if this is the lower sash, that's where the end of this rope would be attached to. And I'm going to, all right, I got the weight all the way up. If I cut it right there, I would have no slack. Now there's a certain amount of slack in the length of the sash cord, so I'm going to give it about 2 inches slack. In other words, if the sash would go down, there would be a little bit of slack left. So again, by using the duct tape, it's made a nice clean cut. Okay, that's that for now. We've got the ropes attached to the weights. Let's get the door back on. All right. Now what's important at this point is to make sure the door fits flush with the rest of the jamb. And now I'm not going to nail it in. I'm just going to put the parting bead since I cut it, even though it's tight, I'm just going to give it a little extra security. I'm going to put a nail about halfway up. Now it's in place. It's not going to go anywhere. Probably thinking, why didn't he use a finished nail? Well, this nail holds better than a finished nail. And in 50 years, the next guy that comes along to replace the ropes, he's going to thank me because I'm going to make it obvious as to where the nails are. Remember the slot that the weather stripping feeds into? This is called a kerf knife. Now, if I wasn't keeping the weather stripping, I wouldn't have to worry about this, but I want to make sure that slot, get the window back in. It'll probably make sense as to why I clamped the rope up there. It'll be easier to see it when I nail on this side, but I'm just going to pull the rope down. Now you have a better look at it. If I didn't have it clamped, this would be hard to hold the rope and nail it at the same time. This is about where the end of the rope is going to be. You actually want the rope to be no longer than necessary. And I don't want to attach to the rope where it would interfere with this slot that the weather stripping would be going into. Let's put one nail in now. Check two things. First of all, does it go down all the way? Do I have slack? Yes. That's about as much slack as I want, because that tells me that the sash goes all the way up. With the sash all the way up, the weights go down, and the weights are off the ground probably 6 to 8 inches. The weight should never hit the bottom, nor should it ever, when you're pulling it down, top out at the top. Looks like I've got the proper length. Now it's just a matter of putting the additional nails in. And you put the lowest nail in first. That creates tension for the rest of the ropes. I see some people screwing through the rope to attach it. That doesn't make sense to me. All right, so we got a window that works. Now the last tricky part is getting the weather stripping in. Now you want this weather stripping to be in pretty good shape. The bottom of the weather stripping, as you can see, has a notch. That fits over the ridge in the weather stripping on the bottom. So that's how you can tell the top from the bottom. Pull the sash out. That's one. See, I'm putting the ridge of the weather stripping into that slot. And there, the opening of this sitting on top of the ridge. If you can see over here, the line that I drew in the very beginning is visible. So I know that I'm in the slot and the window isn't out of position this way. This is why carpenters don't want to screw with these little windows, because of all the little pieces of wood, these little nails. Often you only need one nail to hold the piece of weather stripping in. Final test is does this sash fall behind the stool? And is it flat up here? And all things considered, the window works good. The weather stripping is in. And the very last is putting the window stop up. This might seem to be of little importance, but to me the positioning of the window stop is very important, because you could easily just leave it and nail it, but if you don't have a little gap between the window stop and the window, these windows aren't going to operate. Start by making sure the bases don't overlap the stool. You're pretty good in the top. What I do is I use a putty knife, start in the middle, push it all the way in, pull it out, maybe a strong 1/16 of an inch. Make sure that the rest, that gap exists. Now go up top. Here it's binding up here. That needs a little bit of work. There, just needed to pull it out just a little bit. Yeah, let's see how well it works. Fits down flat across the top. Goes up all the way to the top. See, that's the way the window should work. Now the last thing I don't need to bother you with, we'll caulk the seams that we cut open from the very beginning. And that's re-roping windows. Usually it takes me an hour, hour and a half to do a window. The alternative is carpenter coming in and ripping these out, putting in vinyl windows. Now this is Lancaster City. These buildings are all 100 years plus old. These windows worked fine when they were built, and they work fine right now. So before you consider replacement windows, that's all it takes to fix them. Thanks a lot.